Okay, everyone, it's Noel Christopher with Renter's Warehouse doing my single family rental talk today. Another one of my shows. These are getting a lot easier and easier as I go on. So the purpose of this show is to bring in interesting guests first off, and second to talk about single family rental investing, real estate investing, and then bring in some really cool guests. So today I have a guest who is Eddie Wilson from Affinity Worldwide. Eddie is the CEO of Affinity Worldwide. And he's a great guy and very knowledgeable about everything marketing. And then he runs a company that has a lot of real estate brands. So I'm going to bring Eddie in. He's a definitely interesting guy to know, and I've gotten to know Eddie over the last few years. And Eddie, are you there?
I'm here. How you doing, Noel?
I'm doing great. Great
Good.
to see you. It's been a while since we talked.
It's been a while.
So give us a quick, 30-second elevator pitch of what you do and, about your company.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm involved in all things real estate. I'm actually sitting in a TV studio that I own here in Atlanta, Georgia right now. But I am very interested always in the real estate investment market. So I've built a lot of brands. I've just exited out of a few brands, which has been a good experience. But right now I'm focused on two of the brands that I currently have building those. And one is Think Realty. That's a national media brand for real estate investors. And the American Association of Private Lenders. I think that it's important for every real estate investor to understand, where the deals and what's happening in the market, but it's also important to understand the capital side and the capital structure for our investing. And so keep my hands both in those, looking for new opportunities, but serial entrepreneur, have my hands in quite a few businesses and nonprofits around the world.
So you and I kind of go a ways back, a few years back. I think I attended the Think Realty event in San Francisco.
Okay.
Which I think that you thought of that as a failure, or not, maybe not a failure, but it wasn't as much of a success. And for me, it was awesome.
Good.
Because I connected with you, and I connected with a couple of great clients that some are still my clients now, and some aren't. It just is what it is. And so I really liked about what you were doing and what you guys had going on as a brand. And then, I'm really interested to hear a little bit about your story, because I've heard your story before, but there's a lot of people who haven't heard your story.
Sure.
Of where you came from. I mean, all the way back from growing up. I'm really interested to hear the story all the way to the point where you had to make a lot of big changes a little while back.
Sure.
Because all that's interesting and relevant, and it's real. And then I want to talk a little bit about the real estate market and things like that. So
Sure.
Go ahead and tell me a little bit more about where you came from.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to make it quick and easy, but I started off at a broadcasting school tied to the Ohio State University, and really had this path of going down broadcasting. Loved radio, loved television. Had a passion for it, had a passion for all things media and marketing. In a young age, in my 20s, I found myself managing some really large radio assets in Atlanta, Georgia, and built a couple of television programs that I ended up selling to Fox News and a few others. And that really gave me the platform in my early 20s to begin investing. I grew up in a family of real estate investors. My dad, we grew up kind of poor when I was younger, but my dad was a serial entrepreneur. He left kind of this field that he struggled in. He made good money, and then he didn't make good money, and he just decided, if I'm gonna struggle, I'm gonna do it on my own. And so I remember as a kid watching my dad, build businesses, the lean times, the great times, but in the end, real estate investment was his consistent and his mindset for ultimate wealth building. Now today my dad has lots of real estate and he's built a couple of great businesses. But so I had a great mentor to look at, and a father who always taught me real estate greatest asset class for investing, long before we ever knew that real estate was an asset class, especially in the SFR space. Grandfather's a real estate investor, so I just grew up with it. I grew up, wheeling, wheelbarrows of concrete and helping my dad set block and grading yards and anything that needed to be done while he was building or buying real estate. And so once I had this exit in my 20s, I had some capital to invest, and I didn't want to blow it like all my friends that had some success. So I started investing heavy in real estate. Then I built an advertising agency. That advertising agency did well. I had the chance to exit out of that again, sold that, had more additional resources to invest in real estate again. And so real estate became my consistent. I was my insurer for all those real estate properties was the National Real Estate Insurance Group. Got to know those guys. Ended up, a few years back investing with them and becoming the CEO of what is now Affinity Worldwide, which was the parent up until recent days of 80 plus companies. So even though I've got a passion for marketing and passion for national media, real estate was my consistent. It was a way that I knew that I would build legacy and wealth for my future, for my family's future. And then I started getting heavy into nonprofits. And so then I started finding sustainability and building real estate that would sustain the nonprofit, my passions that I wanted, so that I didn't constantly have to feed it or go out and beg like a lot of nonprofits do. So that's kind of my journey up until just recently. I was really heavily engaged with Affinity Worldwide. Some massive changes have gone on there in the kind of breaking apart of the assets that were a part of that family. So I had the chance to exit again out of the insurance group that we currently have. Tim Norris, great guy, now is the sole owner of that asset and doing a fantastic job. Mike Wren, who is kind of the founder, he's kind of riding off into the sunset and kind of retirement age, which is awesome for him. But after, when I got to that group of people about 3 years ago, the one thing that I noticed was that there was really no aggregate of data in the real estate investing space. I would hear numbers like this, well, there's 8 or 9 million people investing in real estate. And so I would go out and I would try to find ways to find them. And I would go to National Re, I'd go to Bigger Pockets, I'd go to auction.com. Anybody that had data out there, I wanted to know, how do we get to those people? How do you find out who they are? And as being at a good sized company yourself, it's really tough to find those people because oftentimes they don't, the most efficient ones don't identify themselves as real estate investors. They're a doctor, they're a lawyer, they're an engineer, they're a roofer that has a rental property or has multiple rental properties or found an opportunity in real estate, but very few of them actually identify themselves as real estate investors. So 3 years ago, kind of an altruistic approach to the industry, we built the brand Think Realty. And the reason we built Think Realty is because I believe that if you gave away information and you aggregated data for the masses, then the masses would come to you. Our goal is always to get to 2 to 3 million, users a month. Think Realty is still doing really well. It's really in its infancy, only being 3 years old.
And how many users are you at now?
Yeah, so we've got about 1 million people coming to the platform each and every month through all the fingers of Think Realty, so whether it's the website or the events or the magazine that's out on the shelves, Barnes and Noble, the podcast, the radio shows, so on and so forth. So we've got a good reach. But again, that milestone's still out there. There's still an opportunity to aggregate the industry that I don't believe anyone has done yet. At least gotten to a tipping point of 2 or 3 million people that you could say, these are real estate investors and this is the activity that they're going
and
through.
They're there. I mean,
they're there.
So that's something that, we've been trying to figure out too. I mean, to put it in context, we manage, 22,000 or so homes with 14,000 investors, and we are the largest, or if not the largest, one of the largest third-party managers.
Sure.
And we have people, so many people want to work with us because of how many investors that we manage for them. We haven't even really dipped our toe into marketing to those people yet because we're trying to figure out, how do we gather more and stuff like that. So you've got the brand and so with the new 2 things, talk a little bit about how hard it was to split things up, what you did on the exit you talked about recently.
Sure.
If that was difficult and the positive, the negatives, because those are learning lessons, obviously.
Sure.
And then where you see the future going with what you're doing.
Okay. My, just being pretty vulnerable, that's a really difficult process because, there were things in that I loved that I needed to let go of. And it's impossible for any one human being, like, even though I was CEO, to actually know what's going on in 60, 70, 80 companies, it's impossible. And so you're still, no matter what you say or how much I manage my time or how much every single day I looked and picked apart every minute of every day and making sure that I got the most out of it, stuff fell through the cracks. And I had great managers and people that were asset leaders, but aggregating that whole thing was a very difficult task. So the positives in that are, I believe that, and I'll get to the negatives in a second. The positives are these assets that we built together should stand alone, and many of them were reliant on each other because of the symbiotic nature of what we were building. And you really don't know what's viable until you separate them out. And when you separate them out, you find out what is real. What user base is really gonna support this technology asset that you've built, that you're paying for through your insurance company, but yet, you've got it out here to the masses. And so, for us, this was the true test of where is the real value here? What is real? What have we built that is sustainable and can sustain itself? And so with that comes the negative, and so, our insurance company our insurance agency would rival anybody else in the space, and it deserved the ability to grow on its own without always having something pulling from it, so that's a great thing, to allow it to just thrive and grow. And then, you've got Think Realty that is still an infant. I mean, 3 years old in the business cycle. I mean, this is the year where you make or break anything, and in a 3-year cycle, especially when you're not backed by venture capital.
Right.
And so, so this is make it or break it year. So we get to look at this asset and go, what's its real value? Is it really doing something that's sustainable? Same thing with American Association of Private Lenders or Radius, our big contracting group. But in that, there's so many reliant pieces because we were building this hub. And so there were a lot of people that were tied to the hub and the inner working nature of tying some of those businesses together. But in there's a lot of fluff, and there's a lot of inefficiencies that you build to just try to make things work. And so, unfortunately, in any big business with hundreds and hundreds of employees, a change like that rocks the boat, and I think the hardest thing for me is to watch good people who don't have positions any longer. We laid off some people. That to me is the hardest part. To look at someone who you knew gave everything they had, and tell them that there's no longer a position here. Now, the reason it happened was because of the ownership breakup. However, I've done my best to try to help a lot of them find great positions elsewhere in the market, and have encouraged a lot of my friends in the industry to hire, the really good ones and things like that. I mean, but still, that's the hardest part, to sit next to somebody every day, in the trenches, and then they're not with you, in a big breakup like this. That's the hardest part. Probably the second hardest part is getting real with yourself and with our asset leaders, the people that now manage the companies that have been split apart, that were so reliant on a big corporate hub that I created with human resource help and marketing help. And, I built a massive executive team and all of that really to facilitate that, which was good for the time that we did it. But it became inefficient, and a lot of these small businesses need to be just that. They need to be small businesses. They were put into a corporate environment, but they're really just small businesses. They need to go through the growing pains of small business. They need to look at themselves in the mirror every single day and say, are we nimble? Are we changing with the market? Are we meeting the consumer needs? And so there's the good and the bad. I mean, I wouldn't change it today. I'm very excited for where we are. I'm very excited to be moving into a much larger ownership position in the assets that I have, where I always sat in a minority seat.
Right.
And so for me, it's great opportunity. I think for the people that are still with me and the assets I have, it's a great opportunity. And we get to, we get to be a little bit more nimble today, which is awesome.
Well, that goes to the, thinking about small businesses, and this is in general with employees, with businesses. It's not always right to, or you're not always going to be the big corporation. You don't have to grow exponentially every year. Right. You can get to a spot that you can be successful and hum along great there. And that's why, right, sometimes people or businesses have aspirations to get to this huge giant level that really maybe isn't for them.
Right. Yeah. It's the whole phenomenon of Grant Cardone, right? Like, let's 10x everything. And it's like some businesses really don't need that. Yeah. That's where I live. That's the part of business I love. I love talking scale. I love looking at everything and saying, can we go 10x? Can we grow? Can we create the efficiencies and go after it? But, there is a reality sometimes that the market may not support a business that's scaled to that level. And there are some businesses that just cannot be scaled, So, I think that when you pull them apart like we have, there's a reality check looking at each individual one going, okay, where should it be? What's its place in the market? And some of the companies we had have gone away, like we have dissolved a few because really separated from the whole, they didn't have a purpose other than serving something internally. And again, that just shows the inefficiency sometimes of big business.
Well, I think it's pretty, it takes a lot of foresight and maturity to be able to see that, to be able to, break up those businesses, move forward, have that vision, and I would be interested to get your opinion and what you think about some of the venture capital that's happening in prop tech. Right before this, I was on a call with somebody very high up in one of the major real estate brokerage brands. And they're getting hammered right now because they're not going the venture capital route.
Right.
They're not just raising hundreds of millions of dollars based off of a future valuation compared to just, in 10 years from now, they're going to be where they're at. They're going to be profitable, and they can't look at their investors. They can't look at their company and say, well, we'll be profitable in 10 years. Right. And you have a lot of companies right now that are out there doing that are, the amount of money that they're raising based off of future valuation, based off of not even being currently profitable. And that kind of gets back into, we can segue this into a lot of things, into the Fed interest rate cut, because that feeds a lot of that fuel. That fuels a lot of that sentiment of let's just raise money. So I'd be interested in what you think about that on the venture capital side and the prop tech, because there's a lot of disruption happening. We're part of it. You're part of it. But we're trying to do it in a way that is profitable along the way. And I think that that's the proper way to do it. But it's also may not be the short-term most money in your pocket way. So.
Yeah, I think there's a place for both in the market. Like I see, because we have the American Association of Private Lenders, I've seen guys come in, hot and heavy because of the VC capital they have. And they outspend everybody. They get to the market quicker. They oftentimes drive innovation that people said couldn't be done 5 years ago. And so I think there is a place for that, because oftentimes they'll run out front, and 1 out of 10, may actually make it, and the other 90% go by the wayside, which is the nature of, VC money. I think you talk to every big VC investor, and they're hoping that 10% of their investments succeed, but they succeed wildly, right? And that's kind of their model. The thing is if you do it the way, I believe in your business and your business model. I love what you guys are doing. I love the major changes you've made this year. I think there's also a great place for that. And I think it really comes down to what is your long-term strategy. You don't go in and ask for VC money unless your strategy is ultimately to exit, right? Because you're trying to exit at high scale, be acquired by somebody bigger, whatever that is. companies like yours are oftentimes really built for legacy, so you're building something that's sustainable long term, so you're not making these radical shifts and changes. I kind of find myself in the same way. Now do I sometimes wish I had,
Right.
$30-40 million from the VC groups? Sure. I mean, like, I would love it. And, and it's that whole fail fast model, right? Like, take the money, run as hard and as fast as you can. If it makes it, it makes it. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And walk away when it fails. Hopefully to live another day. Our model, I think, is a little bit closer, where it's more bootstrap. It's what efficiencies can we create today? How can we be most innovative in what I have, not what I'm being promised? And that's where I think, it both have its place. I see a lot of carnage in the VC space, because you get people's careers on the line, and you've got, these people that jump on board, and technology. You oftentimes, because of innovation cycles, you'll see innovation that really just doesn't belong in the marketplace. Like, there are corners that are cut because of directions that need to be taken, and so you got to be really careful. I remember when crowdfunding became the hottest thing in real estate investment, a few years back, and very quickly we've seen nearly 70-80% of them go away. And that's because, some of the things they did, some of the technology they built, it just didn't deserve to be in the marketplace, and the marketplace rooted it out. And then you've got the ones that have stood, you still got the ones that are raising capital. So I think VC is a great place for a really great learning curve. And that's what I think, we've had such a dearth in prop tech, that I like the VC money coming in, because it's driven such a massive expansion and growth, and it's caused all these people to ask all these great questions. But there is growing pains in that, and that's where I believe we're at today. Like, in any market cycle, I feel like there's a cycle when VC money comes in too. And I feel like we've hit the peak of the learning curve. Now we're on that downhill slide, which is typically efficiencies, so it's like, how do we make what we've experienced better? Who do we tie to that already has a piece that we don't have? And that's what I'm seeing more in the marketplace today.
Yeah, so that segues into another thing on the real estate market as well. I've seen some interesting things, and which prompted me. I don't know if you saw that video I did, the parody video I did.
I did.
It was just, I was sitting here one day and I just made it up anyway. So now I've got to do another one, though, because our media guys are like, hey, that was really good, do another one. So, but what was born out of that was, I've dealt with the turnkey world a lot, and I've seen so many in the turnkey investing world in the recent years go out of business, and it's really because of margins and disruption. I mean, you have companies that now you don't need as much the middleman to connect you with the turnkey provider, who is sometimes just a middleman who's connecting you with the developer. So, the Morris Invest, those guys, Mac companies, and I've heard from some others that are having trouble. And a lot of people, to me, I've had a few people come out to me like, well, the real estate cycle, it's about to go. I'm going to pull this chart up that you sent out that I used actually on my last LinkedIn live show, just so you know. Avi was supposed to go on it with me, and we got crossed on times. So I'm calling him right before the show. I'm like, are you coming? He goes, no, you said one mountain, not three, whatever. And so I actually did the show by myself, and I pulled up that chart. So I'll pull it up in a minute. But it's interesting that we've seen such hyper growth in the real estate world, and we're still seeing it in the prop tech and all that a lot of people don't remember when things were what the normal is. And I'm not talking about with with the last recession and things like that, but we're seeing a lot of these turnkey guys having issues. We're seeing a lot of, we've been talking about this for over a year about how, where's the real estate market? Is it going to level off? I've always thought that it's going to level off, which I think is what's happening right now. But, I think there's a little bit of false hope with the interest rate because there's not supply. So it doesn't matter.
Right.
It's going to help a few people with some affordability, but the supply is still not there for people to buy homes. But there's still a need for housing, whether it's rental housing, whether it's for a house to buy. And I talk about this a lot. We see a lot of people that come to us, a lot of tenants that come to us who are also dual tracking, looking for a house to buy at the same time they're looking for a house to rent. And it's just a matter of trying to figure out what works. And the good thing is that there's enough professional property management and professional landlords that that used to be, if you had to rent a house, it was, there was a stigma. It was a lesser quality. It was a lesser quality of life. It was very much a turbulent type of situation at times if you're renting a house, because that landlord could decide to sell, they could decide to do anything. Right. Now you've got a lot more stability in this. Now you have, Toll Brothers, Lennar, and now Taylor Morrison Homes are all building rental communities. We're working with some of those guys on selling some of that stuff. So like it's really interesting. But so talk a little bit about that and where you think on the interest rate cut, what that means, good and bad, because there's a lot of, Trump was upset that it wasn't cut enough. Right. I think that, I think that on the corporate profits side and the stock market, everyone's like, oh, the stock market went down yesterday and it went back up today. That makes zero difference to me. Right. In my daily life and what I'm doing in our business and everything, it makes zero difference. So the corporations using arbitrage and buying back stock and all of that, that doesn't really affect us. Yeah. But it does affect the sentiment in the marketplace and with people. So give me a little bit of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, you saw the graph I posted, and I've had a lot of friends reach out. It's funny because I've had so many people reach out privately because they don't want to talk about it publicly, which is what I love about your LinkedIn page. You kind of just throw it out there and get everybody talking. But it's funny because I tagged who I believe to be the leaders in this industry to see if they would respond, and some did and some didn't. Which is fine, and I know a lot of them are busy, but, for me, I believe that we're in that phase of, contraction, and, that's kind of that, we're not.
Hold the chart up here now.
Yeah. And so, to me, that's, we've got, depending on what terminology you use, you've got typically your periods of peaks and troughs and contraction and, recession, or, you can use all the different terminology to speak about it. But to me, there's a couple of key indicators, and that is we have a lack of supply. We are seeing demand start to slow down just a tad. I think we've seen it slow down, over the summer about 2%. So to me, I believe we've hit peak and we're probably in that leveling off space or maybe a contraction space. Like maybe we're headed back down into a traditional cycle. A traditional cycle would be amazing, because I've heard, for 2 years, we've heard the pundits and the economists and everybody else telling us we're going to go back into this massive recession, and it might be worse than it's happened before. And, and they're still saying it. But our market is staying steady and level, in a traditional 20-year cycle. If you use the kind of K-wave theory, we should be going into a 6 or 7 year 4% dip, which would be really healthy for our economy. You don't want to see that hyper growth for really long periods of time, because people like me that make a living investing, we struggle on those long periods of time. And I think that the sentiment is radically different than what the market really is. I listened to an economist, actually listened to a guy this morning. I was at an event down in Atlanta and listening to a guy talking about collateralized loan obligations, and it's like, and going on and on about how, that banks have 55% of the $3.2 trillion in CLOs, and how that could be catastrophic if these businesses, move more into a recessive mode, and it's gonna catapult, it's gonna cascade to the banks, and then it's gonna cascade to the insurance companies, and it's gonna cascade to the
glue.
Yeah, it's just like, geez, have you looked around, and there's a radical difference. I get the chance to interview Doug Duncan on our podcast next week, who's the chief economist for Fannie Mae. And I think he's the most honest economist I've ever met. He things you can't believe he says. But I was talking to the chief economist for NAR 2 weeks ago, and a few others. I'm not going to call them out because I think they were being honest and open with their feelings. But they, it's like they are sitting there looking at Wall Street. They're looking exactly what you just mentioned. They're looking at the stats of CLOs and CDOs, and they're looking at all this collateralized debt that's at the at the highest level we've ever seen, and it's like, but when you take into consideration our population growth is growing, millennials are starting to buy houses. Like you've got investment properties being purchased by the millions. We saw over. I think it was like 30 million new properties turned into investment property last year. I mean, like huge, massive numbers of changing, environment. And the problem is that these economists aren't on Main Street. They're at Wall Street watching the hedge funds and watching all the pension funds and going, oh man, this is different than anything we've ever seen. We better be careful. The thing is you go next door and you find that guy's been employed for 8 years, has had a great job and raises every year. The plumber that comes over to your house, or the guy that comes to fix your HVAC. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and God forbid your HVAC go out because you're not finding anybody to come fix your HVAC because they're 2 weeks behind because there's nobody doing it, or not enough.
It's a lot of that. It's like that across a lot of those type of trades. Yeah,
I mean, and you go across the trades, and and there's a massive incentive for employment. We're flying in nurses and doctors from all around the world because we can't even, put them, the white collar jobs we can't even fill, let alone the blue collar jobs. And we're just in a radically different place. And so you look at Main Street, and Main Street feels very different from what the pundits are saying in Wall Street. And that's where we've got to really kind of engage in that conversation, because yes, I think it's important to understand if the banks are holding 55% of the $3.2 trillion in CLOs and how that's going to affect the marketplace. But in reality, the federal government, or the Federal Reserve, just cut interest rates by 0.25%. That has to mean something, right? Like, and obviously they're a measure for counterbalancing inflation, but that has to mean something. And so obviously, but here's the interesting thing. So they must believe that 0.25 means something, that they're going to do something, or that they're trying to create something or prevent something. But guess what happened when the interest rate went down? Well, really nothing. I talked to a major mortgage broker last night, and I said, is your phone ringing off the hook? She said, no, absolutely not. I said, are you seeing a brand new interest, a peak? And she said, no. She said, housing prices are still maintaining. She said, I didn't have this influx of, I need to refinance, I need to buy. She said, you go back to, 10 years ago, 2008, when the interest rate dropped. She said, every time it dropped, your phone rang off the hook for 2 weeks. And she said, it had no effect on our business. And they're a large mortgage broker here in Atlanta. And so what it says to me is all the pundits, all the economists do not have their finger on what's actually happening on Main Street. And the changes that they're making are them pulling levers. What's going to happen? What happens if we do this? And what they're finding out is the Fed has little to no effect on our economy today based on the robust nature of where we are as an economy. I mean, that should have sparked some change when that happened, but it didn't.
Yeah, and I agree too. I mean, and this isn't the first time it's happened recently. When they raised interest rates, when was the last time they raised them?
March or April, maybe.
Yeah, it didn't affect the mortgage rates really that much.
Yeah, I guess it would have been late last year.
Right. Yeah. And it affected the market a little bit. Things went, changed a little bit, and then it was right back to where it was. Right. And that's kind of the new normal. And on that LinkedIn post, somebody posted something about, okay, like what's the new normal, or there is a new normal, and wrote this whole long thing about a new normal, but didn't say what it was, because I don't think anybody knows what it is. We're not going to know. And that goes into the next thing, into the housing market. I'd be interested to think about it, to give me your opinion on where you think we are in this market cycle. I think we're still in expansion. I don't think it's going to be, I think we're starting to level off in certain markets. But there's that affordability thing. People talk about this, the student loans, affordability. I think that it's less about affordability for me. This is my opinion, and this is just anecdotal, really. it's more about expectations. People can afford to buy certain levels of houses, but the houses that they want to buy, especially first-time home buyers, they want to buy that they want to buy the 2 levels up. And this is something you see in jobs, in people, in new entrepreneurs. They want to get to that 4th or 5th level from the beginning and not work their way up, where it used to be people go into a starter home, then they kind of work up. You would have the baby boomers move out, or what the equivalent of the baby boomers or older generation move out. New people buy new people buy those houses, and that is all being shaken up because, and this is something I've talked about several times. The baby boomers in many markets are not moving out of their houses, and the houses they're moving out of, there's a couple of things. They've either been retrofitted for the end of life, so they're staying until the end of life, and so then there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the house. And there are houses that are not of interest of the generation of buyers coming into the market right now, and so that affects the supply, in a sense. I
mean, to kind of jump in there,
Sure.
I struggle because I think, you come to a city like Atlanta, and I believe that we are kind of on the top of the hill, maybe moving towards contraction. But you go to Columbus, Georgia, an hour outside of Atlanta, and I think they're in full-on expansion. I mean, they don't have enough inventory. It's that's where Fort Benning is, one of the largest military bases in the country. And I know a young turnkey guy that's just crushing it there right now, or Greenville, South Carolina, or Chattanooga, Tennessee. And it's like, and so that's where that hyper local nature of real estate, comes into play, that I think that's where it's hard to tell on the national scale,
That's why you can't use those national numbers, in my opinion. I mean, it's even in some of the large markets, you have to break it down into sub-markets.
I agree. Sub-markets and you look at job growth, population movement, there's a lot of millennials that are moving out of the big cities right now to go to more lifestyle hubs.
Yep.
I read something the other day, out in your area, Colorado Springs is having massive growth with the under 30, but there's not enough housing in Colorado Springs for all the under 30 that are moving there, so It's like, and they're moving there to live remote, work tech jobs, and so that's the hardest piece to define. And that's where, as real estate investors myself, I have to be really savvy into not just looking at the neighborhoods of Atlanta that have potential growth, but looking 100 miles outside of my city to say, where are the graduates of the University of Georgia moving, Georgia Tech, where are they going? Where's the lakes that they want to live by? Where's the mountains that they desire to have in their backyards? Because, it's not as predictable as it once was. I think we have data on where they are moving, but it's not as predictable as it once was, And even 5-10 years ago, when it seemed like all the millennials were moving downtown, the gentrification areas where, you saw these massive growths of, beautiful apartment complexes with all the amenities. It seems like some of those, you go to Dallas and there's a huge occupancy issue, and some of those A-tier, A-class hotel or multifamily, units. And so to me, that's where it's hard to look at it. But I see that there are definitely some parts of our country that are still in full on expansion mode, And it's sometimes in weird markets, like Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland, Ohio is seeing massive growth because of the cost and the job growth that's
Same with
there.
Columbus.
Yeah, Columbus, Ohio, or Indianapolis, Indiana. There's a lot of Midwestern towns that are seeing growth. Omaha, Nebraska. I was there a couple of weeks ago and seeing massive growth there.
Well, it's a lower cost market. The cost of living is less. They have some of these places. They have a little more land. They have more it's just. We're seeing it too, and we're seeing now what I'm seeing with a lot of the investors that we're working with, that I call those, I don't want to call them mid-cap, but they're more mid-size funds. Sure. They are buying in those markets, and they're now saying, no, we don't want to be necessarily in the top 10 or top 15 markets. Maybe if we can find a portfolio that might make sense, but really we're looking at second 50, 50 to 100, or top 100 markets. and they're buying is, now with efficiencies and management and how to buy and construction and underwriting, they're buying anywhere. They'll buy one house in Columbus. They'll buy 100 in Columbus. They'll buy in Iowa. They'll buy in Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Huntsville. Every market that 10 or 20 years ago you would have almost written off, and they were undesirable places to live in general, maybe not for the people living there, but if you were living in a big city and things like that, and during the recession, a lot of those cities opened themselves up for business. They have lower taxes. They've like you talk about the millennials now, a lot of people coming in are more about the experience and the lifestyle, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Everyone's focused on, well, they're not saving money, which could be an issue later in life, but we'll see what happens there. But it's not about buying up and trying to buy the most expensive house you can live in and leveraging yourself to the end. It's more about living a full life. I mean, that's what I believe in. And I know you're about that too. It's not just
drive to it. I mean, you live that out, which is great.
Yeah. I mean, I made that decision several years ago to live the life I wanted. And what was the amazing thing that happened, and we can talk about this a little bit in the end coming up, but your mindset. Just put your mindset to something and you're going to be successful. It's not about keeping up with the Joneses. And I was watching a friend of mine do a Facebook Live thing just recently, and he was talking about real estate investing in Dallas. And he was talking about, it's not how many deals you do, it's doing the right deals. It's not trying to do 30 deals in a month and make 30,000. It's doing 5 deals and make 30,000 and keep your powder clean and don't get don't get over leveraged. So it's similar situation here, but I see these cities. We're seeing it right now. I mean, the demand to go into a lot of these cities with investors, and the idea that investors are keeping out first-time home buyers is crazy, because there's a need for housing. There's a need for rentals. There's a lot more. For example, where I live in Steamboat Springs, it's 35% remote workers. And when I moved here 2 years ago, it was about 25%. So it's changing. It's all over the country. This is happening with the taking away the friction of being able to be location neutral. And once that mindset starts to go around, I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, I met people here. Goldman Sachs has an office here in Steamboat Springs and it's a bunch of 20-something-year-olds that are analysts for them, and they're living in Steamboat, and they're powder skiing in the winter, and mountain biking in the summer. So it's pretty amazing. So I want to bring up one thing here, which I know this is interesting to you. This is the quarterly home sales. And I've talked about this a few times. A lot of the data that comes out on new home sales, and this is not seasonally adjusted, which I don't like to use seasonally adjusted numbers because it confuses things. They'll come out and they'll say, well, home sales are down. From what they don't tell you is that what they were projected to be by a few people that they surveyed where they thought the home sales should be. These are actual numbers. For those out there who are saying that the home builders are pulling back because a recession is coming, this is from 2011 until now. And if you notice, home sales quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4 are up every single quarter since 2011.
Yep. Yeah.
And
it's hard to argue with.
Right. This is not projections. This is not what happens a lot is they come out with the initial number and then they compare that to the actual number from the month before. And so then it's off and they go, oh, it's down 5%. Well, no, it's not. Right. These are actual numbers. So I'd like to get what you think a little bit about that. And if you've thought a little bit about the build for rent and the things that are happening in that space, and just give me some of your thoughts there.
Yeah, just real quick. I mean, I don't look at these numbers month by month. I look at them quarter over quarter. And the problem is because all these economists and pundits, they look at these little minute changes
out of context. Yep.
It's totally out of context. I mean, we had a lumber shortage at the beginning of this year that sometimes delays homes getting to market by 30 days, which could change the whole market by 2 or 3%. So you got to look at it quarter by quarter. You've got to allow the market to expand and contract. and look at it long term, making sure that that trajectory is right, not these little minute details. I'm with you on that. I get frustrated at people that constantly go into the smallest detail to try to make something. But you look at a chart like this, and it's pretty self-explanatory. I believe that we will level off nationally because I think our issue is this supply. There's more capital in the market than I've ever seen in my lifetime, and it's amazing. And that capital is driving more demand, which the supply can't keep up with. And so, to kind of go into your second question, I think the build-to-rent model is a fantastic model, because what is more stable than housing? I would much rather our capital find its way into the housing market, whether it's Wall Street capital or private capital, through the build to rent model, because we're seeing larger numbers of people go into the rental. And so as long as your occupancies are high in a market like Atlanta, it's a perfect place to have a build to rent. As long as your number, and you know what, to me, the build to rent model is based on the fundamental problem that HUD and all these housing organizations are trying to solve, and that's affordable housing. These guys that have, their capital on the line, they don't start with how big can I build this house? They start with what can the market afford? And then they work these numbers backwards, and they go, okay, if the market can afford X number of dollars in rent, that means that I can build up to X number of dollars in total cost for the build. And then the numbers all work out. To me, the build to rent model is a great service to the affordable housing issue that's going on in the country. But it also identifies the states that are completely out of their minds when they're trying to solve these problems, because you don't see build to rent going on in California. You don't see build to rent going on in New York City. And I never want to make it about politics, but sometimes it is. But in the blue states, you do not see a lot of build to rent. In the red states, you see a ton of build to rent, and so you see it in Georgia and Tennessee and North Carolina and Texas and, even Florida now. I've got a friend that's doing a lot down in Cape Coral on the build to rent side. And then you see, companies like LGI and Lennar and Taylor Morrison and all of them, they're getting into it. And to me, they're helping solve a problem. And so I'm all for it. I like when the bigger companies get involved in doing it, because I think they have the data to make the right choices. It services our national economy. I think that it's a great service to our economy when you're putting a product online that becomes affordable to the market it serves and provides a great investment. I mean, to me, that's capitalism at its finest. Find the opportunity, serve the consumer, and then find the return based on your service of that consumer.
Yeah, I think a couple of things on that. One, I'd love to talk to you about your build to rent guys, because I have some investors that are looking I have both, to buy build to rent communities and to just buy scattered site build to rent, and they're pretty aggressive. I'm seeing a lot. Well, right now we're getting inundated with a lot, and I've had to actually more recently weed out some guys who, you still have to build a good product.
Absolutely.
And it's not a free for all. People aren't. Right. This is not dumb money going after this by any means whatsoever. But it's smart money, and most of these builders are smart. They build homes based off of need, like you say. What can the market accept? It's interesting. I've seen some things in Chicago where some guys are starting to build some lesser expensive modular 2-flat type stuff. Yeah. Where when I was in Chicago, you couldn't even build anything that wasn't fully unionized, and that kind of thing. But so you're also seeing build to rent in areas where there's land, where the cost of living is less, so they can buy the land, and they're building more affordable. For every build to rent that is above, let's say, $2,000 a month, and I think we may have lost Eddie. So anyway, I'll keep going. So for every build to rent that we're seeing that is higher price, so higher price rentals, which a lot of people assume, I see 5 times as many that are more affordable, meaning rent is less than $1,500 or less, and it's in affordable areas. It's within an hour of a major metropolitan area for people to commute. It's in nice communities, nice areas that are growing well. It isn't far out, suburban or exurbs. So that's all great stuff. And unfortunately, we lost Eddie. So just want to wrap up with a few things here. So really appreciated to have Eddie on here. We're going to talk a little bit about brand building and mindset. And I just ended on that. We talked a little bit about this in the show. Mindset is such an important aspect, whether in business, whether you're building your brand in real estate, you're an agent, you're an investor, anything like that. There's so much out there about your mindset, about how you can set your mindset in the right way to achieve what you want, and anything's achievable. So I will leave it at that. And thanks for coming on my show. I greatly appreciate it. And look forward to some other exciting guests coming up. As I've done this show, as I've gotten more guests and we've gotten the process figured out a lot better, I've been able to get better and better guests. So really looking forward to that. And thanks for coming on the show, and look forward to seeing any comments, any questions. If you're watching this on a replay, please feel free to ask any questions. And if you want to know what I'm about, we're really about growing our real estate brand, growing my brand personally, and working with our investors that want to buy and sell single-family rental investments. We have a marketplace for that at renterswarehouse.com. I am easy to find and very accessible, and I love to help people and provide any kind of free education I can for anybody at any time. So thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all again sometime. Thank you.